Hey, good morning, Mount Vernon High School. Welcome. Welcome to the 2018 CARE Conference. This is so out of the norm for a high school to be putting on a conference of this magnitude. Today, MVHS students, you will have the opportunity to learn from some amazing and from some very special people. I hope today that you will take advantage of this opportunity by being respectful of your classmates and by being respectful of the presenters. Be on time for your chosen breakout sessions and learn from those unique individuals today who have a story to tell. My hope is that all of us will leave with a better understanding of Dr. King's dream. A dream where people are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. This morning, before I turn the microphone over to Mrs. Erickson, I'd like to say a few thank yous. First and foremost, I'd like to thank all of the awesome presenters that we have here today. Thank you for saying yes without hesitation. If you are presenting today, please stand up. For just we gave you a round of applause. I want you to stand. Some of them are here, some of them aren't here yet. Let's give them a round of applause. I'd like to thank these people for believing that the world can do better. Thank you for choosing to take action rather than just letting things play out. Thank you for playing your role and helping to educate the students of Mount Vernon High School. Thank you, Social Justice course, and Mr. Voigt. Mr. Voigt, Social Justice students, could you guys please stand up here a second? Mr. Voigt and Social Justice class, stand up. Give them a round of applause. You guys' help with the logistics, the hosting, and simply getting this conference going has been amazing. I'm sure that this class, not everyone in the school, but I'm sure that the social justice class now has a little bit better appreciation for everything that goes on behind the scenes for planning and for scheduling and for trying to organize a one-day event. Now take that times 180 for school with 400 kids. It's a lot. So thank you, social justice class. Mrs. Erickson. Hi. Could you please stand up? Lastly, and most importantly, I want to give a huge, heartfelt thank you to Mrs. Erickson for creating this conference. We had this idea last year at the conclusion of J-term. We really had no idea what we were getting into. We really had no idea how many hours it would take, but here we are. Mrs. Erickson has put in literally hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of planning into this conference. She is an educator who connects with students and adults. She absorbs new and relevant material and information. She responds to the needs of those around her. And more than anything, if you've taken her class, she empowers you to change the world. You get to have her as a teacher. Mrs. Erickson has a passion for making the world a better place. Mrs. Erickson cares. Mrs. Erickson, thank you for doing this. As a small token of our appreciation, those flowers are yours.
Good morning. There is a joke in my classes about how long it will take to make me cry. So you guys won that. It's 8:44. You know, Mr. Brand said that you get to have me as a teacher, but the truth is I get to have you as students, and I can't tell you the way in which my students have impacted me, the way in which my students have changed me, and that is why I am here today. So thank you. Thank Thank you. I'm thankful to be standing here at the beginning of a day where we have the unique opportunity to talk about race and bias in our country, in our state, in our town, in our school, and in our own hearts. Students, I encourage you today to be brave, to be honest, to be open as you have these conversations. These are the kinds of conversations that have changed me. I am here because I have had the privilege to know young men and women who have suffered at the hands of racial injustice. As a teacher in New York City, in Chicago's South Side, in rural Ohio, and here in Mount Vernon. I have seen people persevere through that injustice, and I have seen people crushed by it. Though I do not know this injustice firsthand, as a white woman I experience privilege. I have watched its evil wreak havoc on the lives of both the victims and the perpetrators. Because, you guys, racial injustice doesn't just harm the victim, it harms the perpetrator. It is not fair to live a life believing you are less than someone else, nor is it fair to live a life believing you are better than someone else. Both experiences wreak havoc on the human heart. In 1962, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came and spoke to students here at Cornell College in Mount Vernon, and that's him doing that right there. A few days ago, I was on the phone with Dick Peters, who many of you know and who I am sorry to say cannot be here to present. But as we were talking about his years teaching, he casually mentioned the time that Dr. King spent the day with him in his 7th grade classroom when he was teaching students. Once I picked my jaw up off the floor, I couldn't believe I was standing next to someone who was standing next to Dr. King. Once I picked my jaw up off the floor, I was able to ask Professor Peters what Dr. King was like. He was an incredibly kind man, Mr. Peters said. Incredibly kind and incredibly stubborn. He knew what he wanted, and he wasn't about to stop until he got it. Limited as my understanding is, I believe Dr. King wouldn't stop because he knew the importance of what he wanted. Dr. King wanted love to prevail. He wanted love to bring justice, hope, peace, and reconciliation to our nation and to our hearts. In his speech at Cornell College, Dr. King said, "I am convinced that men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they do not know each other. And they do not know each other because they do not communicate with each other." Ladies and gentlemen, this hate, this fear, this unknown, this lack of communication still exist in our world today. And those factors play into economic, educational, and social disparities. It happens here in our country. It happens in our state. It happens in our school. So what do? We love each other. I'm not talking about sentimental or romantic love. I'm not talking about liking each other or being friends with each other. I'm talking about something much more difficult. I'm talking about sacrificially loving each other, even when we do not like each other. In his speech at Cornell, Dr. King described this love as an overflowing love which seeks nothing in return. He goes on to say that this is the love of God operating in the human heart. And when one rises to this love on this level, he loves every man, not because he likes that particular person, but because he is loved. And he rises to the level of loving the person who does the evil deed while hating the deed that the person does. King believed that this is the kind of love that makes it possible for us to achieve a real society. And this love does not happen by our own goodwill or good intentions. We must cultivate this kind of love. And to do that, we must care for people who are different than us. We must seek to understand other people's suffering so that we may see it, feel it, be broken by it, and see our role in causing it, in order to look at those we deem other as we look at ourselves with compassion. And do we not have compassion for ourselves when someone spreads a rumor about us in school? Do we not wish people understood what we were going through when we failed a test? We know we aren't stupid. Why don't they? Don't we want to explain our circumstances and fight for our own justice when we get in trouble for something that wasn't our fault or that we couldn't help? Why then would we be so unwilling to do this for others? Because we are too caught up in our own story to notice someone else's, or to see that our story is part of a larger story. So let us begin the process of change. So students, community members, this day is for you. How will you connect? Find some similarities between yourself and the presenter. How will you absorb? Think about what you would do or what you would want if you were in the situations described today. How will you respond? Listen, speak up, ask questions, don't be a coward. And how will you empower? Be a leader among your peers. Continue these conversations in your communities. The next time you hear a racial slur or joke, you tell the person saying it that it is not okay. Students, community members, speakers, let's make our response awesome, and let's move forward in love. And with that, I am excited to introduce our keynote speaker, Lynn County Supervisor Stacey Walker. Mr. Walker is a native of the area. He grew up in the southeast side of Cedar Rapids, attended Washington High School, and graduated from the University of Iowa in 2010 with a degree in political science. Mr. Walker currently serves on the Lynn County Board of Supervisors. He is the first African-American person to be elected to that position. Additionally, Mr. Walker serves on various boards and committees around Cedar Rapids and is a political activist and writer. A few years ago in the magazine Little Village, Mr. Walker wrote, "My hope is that as a community we can raise our collective consciousness about race and the challenges posed to minorities and communities by too little racial diversity. Addressing racial disparities in this community will take time and effort," he went on to say. "It will take many good women and men who are wise and steadfast. It will not be easy, but it is worthy of our efforts." Please join me in welcoming Mr. Stacey Walker.
Good morning, Mount Vernon. All right, we're still a little sleepy, I understand. I'll ask you again in a little bit. I like to start all of my talks out with a quote from Bertrand Russell, but I'll get to that. Before I get to that, I have to give thanks to Mr. Brand, other faculty and staff, to the superintendent, whose last name I cannot pronounce, to all those folks in the community who have traveled here in this cold morning, and to all of you who are making time in your day to think about these things, these important issues. But I also got to thank Mrs. Erickson, because it takes a lot of courage to organize an entire high school, predominantly white school, to talk about these issues that are so important. And Ms. Erickson, I echo the sentiments uttered by your principal. You are a special, special person. Thank you. Men fear thought as they fear nothing else on earth. More than ruin, more even than death. Thought is subversive and revolutionary. Thought is destructive and terrible. Thought is merciless to privilege, established institutions and comfortable habits. Thought is anarchic and lawless, indifferent to authority, careless of the well-tried wisdom of the ages. Thought looks into the pit of hell and is not afraid. Thought is great and swift and free, the light of the world and the chief glory of man. I had a friend who said, at Harvard University, that's a place where the minds can roar. However, I contend and I believe that the university campus, the educational institution in and of itself, high schools, all of those places that are truly free are all places where the mind can roar. Now, I think you all have an obligation, not just today, but every day going forward, every day of your life, to unleash the power of your mind, the power that comes when you are in full pursuit of truth. And that's what I hope we get at today, is the pursuit of truth. I stand before you today as a living testament to my grandmother, Shirley Ann Martin. She was born in rural Alabama near the end of the Second Great War. She recounted to me neighborhoods where the Indians, as she called them, would live. She told me stories of friends and family members being strung up from trees. One story I'll never forget dealt with the quietness of her grandfather. He was a man who seldom spoke. When she asked her grandmother about this, she was told that her grandfather hadn't quite been the same ever since she'd saved enough money to buy his freedom. She raised 7 kids of her own, and after making the Great Migration north, she lived on the southeast side of Chicago, south side of Chicago. She lived through tumultuous times. The bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, where 4 innocent girls lost their lives. The brutal beatings of the Freedom Riders in Montgomery. And the assassinations of Malcolm X, then Martin Luther King, and so many more of our leaders. But she also lived through some pretty remarkable times as well, including the Brown versus Board of Education decision, which effectively ended segregation in public schools, the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1960 and 1964, and the election of this nation's first African American president a little over 50 years after the Brown decision. My grandmother took care of me and my younger sister when my mother, her daughter, was murdered in Buffalo, New York in the early 90s. My grandmother survived cancer on multiple occasions. She went to college late in life to become a nurse. She went to Kirkwood and Cedar Rapids in her 50s. She was deeply religious. She was the strongest, kindest woman I ever knew. And a few years ago, my grandmother succumbed to illness and she went to be with her God. But while she lay on her deathbed, I was in the room holding her hands. Her heartbeat started to slow. Her breathing got a little heavier. I made her 2 promises. I whispered in her ear. The first promise I made was that I'd always be around to take care of my little sister, even though my little sister's stubborn and she doesn't want me to take care of her. The second promise I made was that her legacy and her good works would live on, and they would live through me. You see, I felt as though I had an obligation at that point, because I could have been a statistic. I was born and raised in government-subsidized housing. We used food stamps. Our neighborhoods were the places you weren't supposed to go after dark. Wore hand-me-down clothes. By all accounts, I wasn't supposed to make it. But I had somebody in my life. I had that one person in my life who had survived things I couldn't even imagine. Who knew, with a little time and effort, a little compassion, that she could make my life better. So I felt like I had to pay it forward, because I knew I didn't get here alone. I tell you this for a reason. I tell you a little bit about my life story for a reason. One, I want you to understand kind of where these social justice genetics come from. It's in my DNA. I am in a long line of people who want to leave this earth a little better for the next generation. But I also tell you that because my challenges surely mirror some of your own. Now, certainly our lives aren't exactly the same, but I know each and every one of you in this room has a set of challenges that you face each and every day. So as I give you a little bit of background on my life, I'm going to play a clip for you that demonstrates the context in which my grandmother grew up in and gives you a little bit of understanding of the origins of the civil rights movement here in this country. What I'm going to play for you is a clip from the Eyes on the Prize documentary series. I first saw this when I was a student at the University of Iowa in a civil rights course, and I think you'll understand why it moved me so.
This is a special presentation of a...
That's not true. I'm advocating.
Possible by the Ford Foundation and the Gilder Foundation.
I guess our courage came out because we didn't have nothing, that we couldn't lose nothing. But we wanted something for ourselves and for our children. And so we took a chance with our lives.
We marched up the steps with this circle of soldiers with bayonets drawn. And walking up the steps that day was probably one of the biggest feelings I've ever had. I figured I had finally cracked it.
My freedom is very much entangled with the freedom of every other man. So I'm fighting for my own freedom here.
Are you scared?
Yes, I'm very much afraid. Everyone here is.
In a 10-year period, in the 1950s and 1960s, America fought a second revolution. It was fought in the South by black people and white. It was fought in the streets, in churches, in courts, in schools. It was fought to make America be America for all its citizens. These were America's civil rights years.
You were advocating Negroes in New York to stay out of these national change stories. Oh, no, that's not true. I'm advocating that American citizens interested in democracy should stay out of change stories.
I had thought for a long time that Negroes should be allowed to sit at the counters where we'll serve downtown. This is just a part of many things that I think they should be allowed to do.
All the people of the South are in favor of segregation. And Supreme Court or no Supreme Court, we are going to maintain segregated schools down in Dixie.
We're going to be beaten for democracy, and you misuse democracy in the street. You beat people. Get out front of the camera and go on. You're trying to be in front of the camera, never facing your shirt and hide your blows. Go on.
It was a clear engagement between those who wished the fullness of their personalities to be met and those that would destroy us physically and psychologically. You do not walk away from that. This is what movement meant. Movement meant that finally we were encountering on a mass scale the evil that had been destroying us on a mass scale. You do not walk away from that. You continue to answer it.
Told me, and when he called from the jail, he said, "Be cool, mother." And was very trying, and yet it was amusing too. He's telling me to be cool at this point.
A society that can live with its conscience. And that will be a day not of the white man, not of the black man. That will be the day of man as man.
It was a hard fight, challenging America's basic beliefs. What is an inalienable right? What is equal treatment under the law? What is liberty and justice for all? It was a hard fight, but the prize was freedom, and no American could afford to lose.
Oh, let's see. This is how we get back to the slide. Left. Well, I'll figure it out later. All right, that was pretty moving, right? When I was in college, we spent a whole section watching this entire documentary series. I think they're free online on YouTube. I would encourage you all to check it out. But that's the context of life. Those are the life circumstances in which people like my grandmother grew up in. And I'm sure your grandparents have memories of this time as well. And so that's sort of the lineage. See other people who don't look like me. Why is it that we ought to care about this? Well, I'll tell you something. I think that those folks are half right. I think we have made a lot of progress. I think people were genuinely excited, Republicans and Democrats, when we broke the color barrier for the presidency. One day we will do that when we elect a woman to that office. We'll break the gender barrier there. And I think, again, Republicans and Democrats will genuinely be excited about that. So you ask, why? Why is it that we pay attention to these things? Well, a good friend of mine, longtime educator and founder of the Academy for Scholastic and Personal Success, a person you'll hear from later today, Dr. Ruth White, always encourages us to remember your past. Remember on whose shoulders you stand. Because if you don't, sometimes history has this funny way of circling back around. And we end up fighting different iterations of the same battles we fought before. Now this past year in Iowa and around the country was a volatile one. And we had to come to grips with some pretty painful things, some pretty painful rhetoric. And we see it being played out today, even at the highest levels in our government. And we're asking ourselves some very similar questions. We're talking again about civil rights. We're talking again about human rights. We're having policy decisions, policy conversations right now in 2018 about whether or not it's right for women to earn the same amount of money as men. We're having policy conversations right now where we're asking the questions as to whether or not we are facing an epidemic in this country when unarmed black women and men can be gunned down in the streets. The number one cause of death for a black man between the ages of 15 and 34 is homicide. That is a statistic that is real and true here in the United States of America, the greatest country on earth. We are having conversations about a new poll tax. You guys remember what a poll tax is? No? No? Anybody? Poll tax? Maybe a couple? You should watch the movie Selma tonight if you haven't seen it. The first 10 minutes will give you a really good example of what a poll tax is. It's essentially a barrier that stands in the way for people to vote. Back in the Jim Crow South, we had reading tests. We charged fees for people to register. We made certain people memorize the names of every county judge before they could access the ballot. What does this do? This disenfranchises people. And you add that on top of gerrymandering, which is still happening today in this country. Gerrymandering. Anybody know what gerrymandering is? We've got a few more people. It's when you draw voting boundaries in a way that waters down the influence of a particular group. It's just happened in North Carolina. We've got voter suppression laws being passed. Some might argue that Iowa just passed a voter suppression laws designed to lower access to the franchise, to the ballot. All of these things, these are new civil rights battles that you, all of you now, are now responsible for. They fought those battles in the 60s, in the 50s and 60s, and we've got a new set of challenges we have to be accountable for, and two. And I've got one more clip I want to show you, because I've given you some context about what was going on in the 50s and 60s. And what I want to leave you to think about is a new concept. Many people here have, and that is the concept of privilege. And privilege is a complex thing. Privilege isn't only just folks who have money. Privilege isn't only about the color of your skin. Privilege comes in all shapes and sizes, and it affords you the ability to do things that other people might not be able to do. So I'm going to try with all my might to manipulate this. Bear with me. There we go. Oh. Okay.
Hey, line up! Line up! Everybody line up! We're about to race! Everybody line up! Shoulder to shoulder. Take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up. We're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. It's a $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Every Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go! If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
All right. How many folks have seen that video before? Oh, good, 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 good. So I believe that video explains the idea and privilege in a way that's very accessible. A few things I found incredible about that video. Notice that the coach or the moderator says, nobody believes that these folks who are stuck at the beginning of the line shouldn't run the race, because they're still going to do it. They're going to give their all. Also, I liked how he pointed out that where they were in life was okay. It's okay to have privilege. Each and every one of you will do your best to give your kids the best chance of success. If you can afford a tutor, you're going to get a tutor for them. You're going to make sure they don't have to worry about things like paying bills, and that all they got to do is go to school, do the best they can, and be a good person, right? That's not a bad thing. We're not demonizing those folks with privilege. We're not demonizing those folks of means. But what we're asking is that they understand their privilege and understand their lot in life relative to others, and use that privilege to extend a hand and help those folks who might need it. And that's the lesson. You will decide what issues you think are important in this life. Whether you want to get serious about lessening and eradicating that pay gap between the sexes. Whether you want to get serious about this environment that we all share and we've got to pass down. Whether you want to get serious about ending the extrajudicial killings of unarmed black folks in this country. Whether you want to get serious about reforming the criminal justice system. All of these things and more, you're going to have to decide which one or how many of these issues you want to pursue. You're going to expend a little bit of that privilege every time you do that. I'm just asking that you consider doing that. And that's what Dr. King was asking. He was asking, particularly in a letter from a Birmingham jail, you should read that as well. He was asking us, are we okay with these injustices that go on in the world? Particularly those folks who can do something about it. Are you okay with that? And I hope you will meditate on these things when you go into your breakout rooms. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And we're going to take a few minutes to ask to do a question and answer. Mr. Walker is not leading a breakout session, so if you have questions.
you grew up with. So thank you.